welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I'm your host, Beth Stallwood, founder of Create WorkJoy. In this conversation, I talk to Carla Miller, leadership coach, author. Really interesting conversation, a bit about her career and the kind of detours that you can take and the things that don't go so well, as well as the things that do, and how that has led her to work on influence and impact with women leaders as a coach. So really interesting conversation. I really hope you enjoy this one. Hello and welcome to the WorkJoy Jam. I'm delighted today to be joined by Carla Miller, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Rather than me introduce Carla, over to you. Tell us a little bit more about you, Carla.
Thanks, Beth. I'm delighted to be here as well. I'm a big fan of the podcast. So my background is as a women's leadership coach, basically. That's how I spend my days, empowering women in their careers, whether that's early on in their careers and encouraging them into their first management role, or working with senior leaders who want to make their voice heard, which, as many women know, can be really challenging within a male-dominated workplace. And I think I fell into working with women, having worked with a lot of leaders over the years. I started to realize that there were some themes coming up working with women one-to-one. And I thought, I wish I could just get them in a room together, because I can tell you until you're blue in the face that you're not the only one with an extremely vocal inner critic, and there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. But it's only when you're in a room full of people and you're going, these people are amazing, and they're looking at me like I'm amazing too. There's nothing like solidarity, is there, Beth?
Yeah, and such a good point is that we all think these things only exist in our heads, and then we speak to other people and get it out in the open, like, oh, it's not just me who has this internal voice that says all these things to me. Other people have it too.
Exactly.
Love it. And what was it in your career? Because you didn't start off being a women's leadership coach, did you? You had a kind of career before that. Tell us a little bit about, your story that got you to where you are today.
Sure. So I worked in the charity sector for many years. I was that person who went to university. I studied politics and got very disillusioned by politics because there was no right answer. I was like, you just keep telling me all the time what's wrong with the answer we learned last week. And quickly realized that wasn't actually the way to change the world. And that's what I wanted to do. And in my own small way, I think I still want to do that, even though it still sounds as cheesy now as it did when I was a teenager. So I remember going to the university career service and saying, I want to work in the charity sector. And they were like, well, there's no jobs and it doesn't pay anything. I was like, oh, that's helpful. Thank you. But I did eventually get a job in the charity sector and had a huge passion for that sector. Was always really ambitious. So my first management role, I just wanted to do everything differently from the managers I'd had before who had made me cry. And I just wanted to be super nice. And that didn't actually go that well. So that kind of got me thinking about the need to understand your impact on others, develop yourself. And I learned that whilst I wasn't a natural manager, there were ways that I could improve. I was quickly promoted in numerous organizations, and I was often the younger person who was promoted over their peers, and their peers weren't that keen on that idea. And so I had to learn how to influence, how to work on my own imposter syndrome, because as you can imagine, that was flaring up a lot. If everyone else is questioning why you're doing a role when you first step into it, it's understandable that you also start questioning it. And as I learned these different skills, my career went from being quite a struggle to suddenly people were listening to me. I was promoted easily. I ended up as a chief exec of a small charity for babies with heart problems called Tiny Tickers. And then I moved into recruitment. I did a bit of a detour, ended up recruiting senior fundraisers, which is what I'd been. I'd been a fundraising director for quite a few years, and ended up as managing director of the company, having to manage all these people who had literally taught me recruitment a year earlier, which was, again, imposter syndrome flaring up. And I was coaching alongside all of that because I'd always been interested in people. And all of that just came together, really. And I thought, this didn't need to be as hard as it was. I didn't need to question myself for all these years. I didn't need to make all those mistakes in order to learn the right way to do things. And I want to help other people to shortcut and avoid those mistakes, and to believe in themselves and feel more powerful earlier on in their careers. And I'm lucky enough that that is now how I spend my time, and work with hundreds of women now through my Influence and Impact program, which is my signature program for female leaders. And it is amazing how much we all have in common, even with our different personalities, the things that we all struggle with within the workplace.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, what an interesting career as well. And it's so funny. So many people I talk to on the WorkJoy Jam podcast I went to the careers advice about what I could do. And that one thing they suggested wasn't exactly what I really wanted to do. And this whole, oh yeah, well, there's no money in that. There's nothing. It's like, well, there are jobs. There's thousands and thousands of jobs in the charity sector. There's lots and lots of great things that you can do. But yeah, really interesting that you had that and then stepped into these roles, had your ambition. And tell me a little bit more about this thing about you wanting to be super nice and how it didn't really work out for you. Because I think we often think that if we've had bosses that make us cry or make us upset, that we want to do the opposite of what our bosses do. So we go from being horrible to really, really nice. But that didn't work for you either.
Absolutely. In fact, I ended up having to fire the first person that I hired and line managed, because, like you said, I just wanted to do the opposite, and I didn't know anything else about managing. I just knew what I didn't. I didn't want someone to experience what I had. I wanted to encourage them, support them, which obviously is really, really positive. What I failed to do was to clearly set expectations and boundaries and hold people accountable to those. So, I mean, first of all, I obviously wasn't very good at hiring because I hired someone who was not in the right role for her. But I would sit down regularly and in one-to-ones and say, look, this is what's not going well. This is how you need to improve it. But what I didn't do is step into the authority that came with my role. I would do it as if I was talking to a friend, and she didn't take it seriously. And sometimes she even kind of laughed at me. So I clearly had to work on my delivery, and nothing improved in terms of her performance. So we came to her 6-month probation period, her review, and my director said to me, so how's it going with this person? And I said, I think I'm going to extend their probation because the potential is all there, but we're really struggling, or I'm really struggling to get her to perform in these really important areas. And this was in the 90s, no, early 2000s, to be fair. So I suspect legislation was different then. But my boss at the time said, yeah, no, we're not going to extend it. We're not going to confirm her. We're going to let her go because people turn up at their best in the first 6 months. And so she made me fire her that afternoon. The girl cried. She was totally shocked, which was totally on me. I tried really hard not to cry. And it was just a horrible experience all around. And this is what I mean by not being a natural manager. But what I learned from that is that actually in trying to, I guess, protect her and not being really clear, not only about what was going wrong, but the consequences of that, and what that meant, actually I had done her a huge disservice because she had not had the opportunity to recognize what was going to happen if she didn't up her game. Sorry, that's Siri. Siri's decided to join in.
That's all right. Hi, Siri. Welcome. It doesn't matter. All the things we turn off. Now my Siri's getting going as well. They're talking to each other. I love it. I think this is an interesting thing, isn't it? Is that first step into management and this assumption that we all know what we're going to be doing with it. And suddenly we've got a manager title. So therefore manager we must be. Yeah. You say, you weren't necessarily a natural manager. I'm not sure many people actually are. It's a tough gig being a manager.
It is, absolutely. And I ended up creating these 2 profiles. This was coming up so much in the women that I work with. I created 2 profiles for the women that I work with. And one is this one of what I call a likable Lucy. So likable Lucy has many strengths. She's great at coaching her team, at developing them. She's incredibly supportive. But she doesn't have any time to focus on her own work because she is constantly available. She is spoon feeding them answers instead of asking them to come up with their own solutions. It's hard to get people to take her seriously. And when she delegates, for example, things keep bouncing back to her and she ends up doing them herself. I bet you've come across some likable Lucies.
I think I might have been one at one point.
Oh, I definitely was. And so what we want to do is keep the strengths of that, but I encourage women to step into the authority that comes with your job title, because you don't have to have natural authority. I was young. I looked even younger than I was. So I was looking about 16, managing a team of people who were in their 40s. And so I didn't have any natural authority, but I gradually realized that my job title came with authority. And I see so many women where we take on all the responsibility that comes from our job title. And I'm sure it's not a woman only thing, it's just that's who I focus on working with. But we take on all that responsibility, but we don't take on the authority that comes with it. And we just end up overwhelmed and overworked and stressed out.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Yeah. So likable Lucy, you were trying to be that person. And actually, people are waiting for you to step into that authority, aren't they? They want you to. There's a reason why we have managers. There's a reason why we have leaders in organizations, is to actually have the authority. And you can do it in a nice way, right? You don't have to be a horrible person to step into your authority.
Exactly. And I think it's about setting really clear expectations and holding people accountable. So when you delegate something to somebody and they don't do it on time and you're having to chase them and you say, well, why did that happen? They usually say, oh, I had other priorities, something else came up. And what we typically do is go, oh, okay, well, no worries. I'll do that. I'll pick that up. And so at no point does that person learn that that wasn't the right way to approach things. Instead, I encourage people to, and it's all about tone, really, because you can be firm and clear without shaming someone or making them feel less than or smaller. But it's about tone and saying, okay, well, we'd agreed this deadline, so what happened? And just leaving that amount of space, because you don't want it to be so comfortable a conversation that they don't register what happens. You don't want it to be deeply uncomfortable, but there needs to be a bit of discomfort. If you're not doing your job well, if you're not doing what someone's asked you to do, there needs to be a little bit of discomfort. You don't want to disappoint someone. You don't want to let them down. You need to know that actually, oh, that has consequences for other people and potentially for me when I'm consistently not doing what I say I'll do.
Yeah. And it's funny, isn't it? Because I think sometimes as a manager, especially when, we haven't got lots of experience of it, and I was in a very similar position, that I was always kind of managing people who were older than me for quite a lot of my career. And that idea that we don't want to make them feel uncomfortable, but by doing that we make a lot of other people feel uncomfortable. So it's that we're actually just passing on the discomfort to ourselves or to other people in the team by not dealing with the situation.
Absolutely. And I think it's about being likable, isn't it? And I was explaining this to my Be Bolder cohort yesterday. There is a difference between being likable and being liked all the time. And I think as managers, we can absolutely be likable people who care about our teams, who advocate for them, who ask them how their weekend was, and who give them leeway when they need leeway because there's things going on in their life. However, we can't always be liked because we're going to have to make some tough decisions. And it's just not possible. You know this, don't you? It's just not possible to be liked by everyone. And if that's running our thinking, if we feel like we need to be liked, then it's really hard for us to then have those tough conversations that we need to have as managers. So I've always tried to be a likable person, but one who is prepared to have those tough conversations and maybe not be liked in that moment. And maybe they do go home and complain about me to their housemate or their partner, but they know that I respect them, I value them, and I'm giving them the feedback for their benefit as well as for the organizations.
Yeah. And that's the difference, isn't it? And it's so similar to what I talk about with WorkJoy. Is you actually can't have WorkJoy 100% of the time, because you wouldn't actually notice it of joy if you did part of it. And real life happens and tough stuff happens, and you're probably never going to get loads of work joy as a manager from having a really tough conversation with one of your team and telling them that they've not done a good enough job. Because actually, if you get loads of joy from that part of the conversation, I'm not sure you should necessarily be a manager, but maybe. But I think this is the point, is that we have to step into some of the things we find difficult, some of the things we find hard, to do a good job. Whether we're a manager or whether we're an employer, whether we're a leader, whoever we are, there are going to be bits of the jobs that we don't enjoy. It doesn't mean they're not important. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have to do them.
Absolutely. And they're also the things you don't tend to get taught. Like I was taught how to run a one-to-one, how to do a strategy and how to do budgets and a bit of presentation skills, but I wasn't taught how to deal with an employee who isn't taking you seriously, or how to deal with those complicated team dynamics that go
Mm,
on. And I think that's the gap I try and fill, is that stuff that maybe no one else is talking about, but my God, it makes your life easier when someone gives you
yeah.
some strategies and approaches and also tells you it's not you, there's nothing wrong with you, this isn't easy, here's a simple way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it all the time and they wouldn't be called difficult conversations, would they? They would be called joyful conversations or, oh, yeah, everyone takes feedback really perfectly and no one's ever going to cry or get upset or get angry with you. But that's not how human beings tend to work. So I totally get it. And it's interesting because so much training is on the process of conversations versus the actual how do you deal with it when. And that's the challenge with management is that you part of it you can learn with some great training and part of it you have to learn with the individual that you're working with because
Mm.
how they react, what their emotions are, that's always a complicated thing. And you can have the same approach with two different people who receive the information in very different ways.
Absolutely. It is all about being able to tailor your approach. And that's where emotional intelligence comes in. And also what I am huge on is self-awareness, because we all have blind
Mm,
spots and some of us have huge blind spots where we don't realize the impact we're having on other people. And as managers, obviously the impact we have on others is multiplied because we have power. We might not call it power, but actually we do have power. And so if we snap at someone because we're having a bad day, or if we handle something badly, it has a lot more impact on other people. And so I think one of those core skills you can work on for yourself is understanding the impact you have on others. And sometimes that is about having the conversation and saying, how do I make your job harder? Is there anything I'm doing that is not supporting you? And
yeah.
sometimes there are things where you're like, okay, well, that's just part of my job. I have to do that. And there are others where you're like, okay, so if I communicate this differently to you, that lands better. Because sometimes we can work that
Mm.
out on us by ourselves. But why not have a really healthy conversation about that?
Yeah, and actually be really open to that feedback and to do something with it,
Yeah.
even if doing something with it is that's actually not something I can change because that's how we do things around here. But I can change how we approach it. I can change how I communicate it. But the actual thing itself and stepping into that boundary, saying, no, that is how it's going to be. That is the job that we need you to do. We're not going to change and adapt everything. Yeah, and that self-awareness piece. And it's something that we can also, I think, I find a lot of people get into the self-awareness piece and then get obsessed with not being able to do anything because they're like, well, how will people take this particular thing? So it's stepping into understanding who you are as a leader and what you want to be famous for and being okay with not being liked all the time. That's okay.
Absolutely. And I have a tool I share called the cloak of authority. So I came up with this at the time when Harry Potter films were very
Mm.
popular. So I'm aging myself here, if I didn't already, by talking about the early 2000s. And Harry Potter had a cloak of invisibility. When he put it on, no one could see him. And at the time, I was having to have conversations that Carla, the person, did not want to have. I was having to, for example, have a conversation between two of my heads of. I was a director of fundraising and marketing at the time. And they were both very good at what they did, but they just hated working with each other. And they would come and complain to me all the time. And I needed to sit down and say, this isn't a playground. I'm not your school teacher. At your level, you actually do need to be able to work things out. So let's get to the crux of the issue here. And one of them I had a very good relationship with, and one of them I had a strained relationship with. And what I did was imagine that I had this cloak of authority that was my job title. So it wasn't Carla the person going into that meeting unprotected. It was Carla, the director of fundraising. And it was my job to have that conversation. And it was my job to have it seriously. And it was also my job not to say to the person I liked afterwards, you know, we're still friends, don't you? Which you really want to do because you just really want to be liked. And so many people have used that idea of putting on the cloak of authority, because when you do that before you go into a meeting that's challenging, where you need your authority, so perhaps performance management or a meeting with the board, or where you're going to have to challenge upwards or challenge a decision with your line manager, just knowing that actually it's your job to do this, to have this conversation. And you have authority that comes with your job. You're being hired to make something happen, or you're being hired as the expert in what you do, and you can own that and speak from that place. It's
Yeah.
just a really simple tool, but it makes people feel more equipped. And that's the same with many of these tools and visualizations, isn't it? Psychologically, it helps us feel like we've got a little bit more control over a situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of anything that helps you step into that in a more positive, engaged, feeling good about it way will make the outcome of that thing better than if you go in feeling like you don't have that power or you don't have that authority, because the reactions and the impact is going to be very, very different for whether the board signs off what your budget is going to be or whether the conversation goes well, will depend on how you show up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think so much about managing and leading. I think when you go to training, you read books, they talk about what you're doing. Whilst I believe how you're being, exactly what you said, how you're showing up is just as important, because the energy you bring into the room, not bringing your baggage into the room, being really present, being really grounded, stepping into your authority, just being a person that when people deal with you, their day gets better, not worse, is so important.
Yeah. So it's that kind of being versus doing thing, because the doing thing is the thing that is, it's not necessarily not all the doing is easy, right? There are some tough stuff that you'll have to do, but if you show up in the right way, if you know are present, if you're grounded, if you're engaged in it, the doing of it will be easier because of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. um right, so we talked a little bit early on in your career. Tell me a little bit about the move from being a CEO in the charity sector in this detour that you took into the recruitment world, because I love it. So I believe that careers are not linear. They're not all about ladders. There's a very kind of different approach to these things. And this seems like a pretty big detour. How did that come around?
I think I was used to having detours when I got burnout after that director of fundraising role, where I had tripled income. I'd taken a team that was really struggling and unhappy, and together we had become this fantastic team. And it had involved putting out a lot of my personal energy, and I just had none left at the end. And at that
Right.
point, I was like, I want no responsibility. And I sold my house. I got rid of the car. I was like, money in the house, that's just imaginary money. I can sell it and make it real money. And then spent some time just doing interesting things, like living in the south of France, learning French for 2 summers, which was
Wow.
incredible. Um, but I also trained as a coach, and I started doing a lot of interim roles, which really suited me because I overinvest emotionally. But my brain, I have a very strategic brain and a very problem solving brain. So going into an organization and doing interims where I could really help improve things, but not emotionally overinvest, was helpful.
Yeah.
I was doing that for years alongside the coaching, really enjoying it, and wanted to keep my hand in with leadership roles as well, because I think when you're teaching, training, coaching leadership, it's really useful if you can actually remember what it's like to be in that situation with all that responsibility on your shoulders. And it's useful to keep your hand in. And I had taken on I needed a mortgage, quite frankly. Working for yourself, and you may know this, it's really hard to get a mortgage sometimes. And so I
Yeah.
needed a permanent role, and I'd taken on a permanent role that was, I'm being totally honest in this podcast here, that was a disaster. So, when you go for the interview and your brain goes, yeah, I'm really not sure about this. Your alarm bells are going off. But the offer they make you is just really sensible. The sensible thing to do is to take that job. And that's exactly what I did. In the interview, I even said, look, I am a change maker. Like, this is what I do. If you're not up for that, I'm not the right person for this job. They still hired me. And I was basically managing director of the UK side of a global charity. But my line manager thought it was still the 1980s. She was the European director. And so she wouldn't let me talk to my direct reports on my own. She asked me every time I had a meeting to email the action points afterwards. And she terrified the people that worked for her, and they would come to me and say, what's going on? Not what's going on, but we want to change this, this, and this. I would put that to her, and she'd say, well, no one else wants to do this. And I'd say, yeah, the team are behind it. She'd ask them, and they go, no, we don't want to do that, because they were terrified of her. So I'm sat there going, this is not good, but I've nearly got my keys to my house. I just need to sit it out another 2 weeks. And she fired me, which had never happened to me before in my life. And actually, she'd never fired someone before. So she called me the day before and said, tomorrow I'm going to fire you. It's like, that's a terrible, terrible thing to do. You've just completely alienated someone and then told them to come up to work the next day and surrounded by other people. So I sat there and I was like, right, I'll write my handover notes. I'll just be as professional as I can. I knew this wasn't the right fit. And so I actually handled that conversation incredibly professionally. But I was there going, I need a job. I've got a mortgage. And I had spoken at an event with the the owner of Charity People, which is a leading charity recruitment company. We got on well. We had a lunch to commiserate the fact that I'd been fired for the first time in my life. And bear in mind, I was a leadership coach at this point as well. So it was not ideal. I think my brand of leadership coaching is to be incredibly honest. And I think people resonate with that, luckily. And he said, well, you know all these people, you love developing people, you love spotting talent, you've got connections. Why don't you come and try recruitment? So I was like, yeah, okay, sounds good to get paid for the connections you've got. And so I joined this company, and it was a very forward-thinking company. It wasn't like you had to do cold calls every day. I hate cold calling, have always hated cold calling. I did not pick up the phone and cold call anyone. It was about relationship building. It was about giving back to the sector. Incredible team of people who generously taught me everything they knew about recruitment, and it turned out I was pretty good at it. But after a year, I was like, yeah, I'm kind of bored of doing the same thing every day. I miss fundraising. I miss having coaching to do as well. And then I was made managing director of the company, which was a whole new challenge and really fascinating, and working on the branding and the culture and that side of things. So I did that for a couple of years, and then thought, I'm either going to do this for the rest of my life, or I'm going to go back to the coaching side of things and the fundraising side of things. And that's what I decided to do. But so it seems like a really random detour, but actually it was building on things I'd done before. And it's been so helpful for me now, because now when I'm coaching people in the commercial sector, well, I've run a commercial organization. I've dealt with massive cash flow crises. I've got on PSLs. I've done all of that stuff. And it, to me, I think I just keep on building. And I guess for you, it's about following your work, Joy, isn't it? I just keep doing more of what I like and less of what I don't like. And I keep on building until now I get paid to be myself, and I love it.
Yeah. And that's totally like WorkJoy. Like, do more of the stuff that brings you joy, do less of the stuff that doesn't, and see where it leads to. Like, follow the good stuff. And that's not to say that you're going to be there 100% of the time in the joy stuff. Like, you run your own business, there is a lot of stuff in there that probably doesn't bring you loads of joy. But the main part of it, the coaching, the working with people, the having the impact, I imagine, is the stuff that does.
Absolutely. And I think I just love creating things. And like you say, it's the impact, but I like to, when there's nothing there, I like to create something. I never thought of myself as creative as a child, and I can't draw or anything like that. But I've realized creativity looks different for different people. And for me, it's bringing things to life that can help other people. And I'm lucky enough now that I have a team, so I do get to outsource the fiddling around on Canva, which some people love but I hate, and the editing of my podcast and the admin and invoicing. So you're right, I do get to do the things that I love, which for me is about the teaching, the coaching, and just seeing that impact that you can make, and that building a community. And I'm sure you'll have the same with your club. There's something incredible about building a community. It has a life beyond you. And so I always say to people when they're thinking about joining Influence and Impact, this isn't about me. You're going to learn as much from each other as you learn from me, and you are going to contribute to this community and make a difference to other people.
I love that. So tell us a little bit more about what you do around your programs now, how you help people, because you talk about like coaching, doing the things you love, building a community. What kind of stuff do you do with the people in your community, with your people you're coaching, to help them?
So the main way I work with people is through my Influence and Impact framework. So this is working on the key areas that I saw a lot of women struggling with. So the first is seeing yourself as a leader and believing in yourself. So tackling that imposter syndrome, tackling the perfectionism and overworking and overinvesting that so many of us do, dealing with the worry that keeps you up in the middle of the night. Such a big thing. And I've gradually been realizing more and more that women are, I believe, probably more self-aware, more emotionally intelligent. We have spent a lot more time on our personal development than your average man. And yet we seem to experience a lot of imposter syndrome still. And it's because we're trying to thrive in a workplace that wasn't designed with us in mind. I've been reading a fascinating book, but I won't tell you what it is till the end because I think it's one of the questions you're going to ask me. But it's all about basically how women have to prove that they're competent whilst men don't have to do the same. How hard it is for us to get our voice heard. And when that's happening again and again and again, you start to think there's something wrong with you. Maybe no one's listening because what I have to say doesn't have value. And I see that in so many women. I saw it in myself. So that's the first part, is really seeing yourself as a leader. And then the second part is being seen by others as a leader. So stepping into your authority, increasing your impact, working on your personal leadership brand. So being intentional about how others perceive you, and also how you show up in meetings. So avoiding some of those caveats that we use a lot, like I might be wrong, but, or I'm sorry, but, I'm not sure, but, when in fact we know we're not wrong, we're not sorry, and we are sure. And yet we're still caveating what we say because we are worried about being unlikable. So that's the second part of it. And then the third part of it is about influencing, because this is the other profile I was talking about earlier, is respected Rachel, where you've got managing downwards completely sorted. But actually, when it comes to navigating internally, managing sideways and managing upwards, and speaking the language of senior stakeholders, you are not getting your voice heard. You and your team are not being valued by the organization as much as they should be. And so that's what we work on in that part of the framework. So those three areas make up the influence and impact framework. And then my influence and impact program is a 12-month program. People join at any time. They have all of that content in online modules. So they can access those in bite-sized videos, dip into what they need to. And then we have 2 calls a month. One is a teaching call where we bring women together, we put them in breakout rooms, and we'll talk about one of those topics and do coaching exercises. And like I was saying earlier, we go around comparing our messy insides to everybody else's outsides. We think everybody else has it sorted. All these women we look at, and they're ambitious, they're successful, and we don't realize that actually their insides are just as messy. And that's what we do within influence and impact. I've tried to create a really safe space where people can realize that by being vulnerable and open, there's huge strength. And that's part of encouraging women to lead their way rather than trying to fit into this masculine blueprint that has traditionally been what leadership looks like. So we have teaching calls, and then we also have a coaching clinic where I will coach anyone who needs help. And actually what I've started doing is then opening it up, not so that people can be coached by 20 other people on a call, because no one wants that, but so that others can share their advice, their own experiences, what's resonated with them. And that has made that a much richer call, actually. And it's been really good for keeping my ego in check, to realize, no, it's not just a line that you'll learn as much from each other as you will from me. You probably actually will. Yeah.
For sure. And that power of getting people together, and what you were saying there about we compare our insides to other people's outsides. I think when you look at things like the impact of social media, or not knowing people well enough and just seeing how they turn up in a room, and it's difficult, isn't it, for us to know that actually they have angst on the inside, that they've struggled with their own imposter syndrome, that they were there 20 minutes before they did this presentation that you saw and you were bowled over by, that they were sat in the loos like crying about it. You just don't see that other stuff, do you? You just don't witness it. But to be able to be in that lovely safe space where people can tell you that they're in a similar position, maybe not in exactly the same, but a similar position, or they've been through it before, that has real power. And I think for me, that's where the community makes a massive difference around getting people together.
100%. And I think it's also about modeling that yourself. I mean, I'm lucky that I attract these incredible women into the program. They may not see themselves as incredible at the beginning. Hopefully towards the end, they do start to see themselves as incredible. But it's also that idea that you don't have to be perfect to be really, really good at what you do. I am a really, really good leadership coach. I also got fired. I also had to fire the first person that I line managed. Those can all be true at the
Yeah.
same time. And I think there's freedom in that when we can be authentic as leaders or as coaches, it gives others implicit permission to do the same. And then
Yeah.
we all have a more authentic way of living and communicating.
Yeah. So for sure. And one of the things I often talk people about, and they look at me sometimes like, Beth, you're insane, is I say things like, well, you're a role model to your team and you might be searching for a role model for yourself. And I'm like, but are you thinking about how you show up as a role model to other people? And they look at me like I'm not a role model. I'm like, well, you are. If you're one of
Mm.
these super incredible women who's coming on your program to develop their leadership skills, if they're people who are stepping into big roles, they often forget that people are looking up to them. And actually, what message are you giving out there? I love the idea that you kind of focus on that, how they're seen by others, as well as how they see themselves, because there'll be people out there going, wow, they've got all their stuff together way more than I have. And they'll be sitting there thinking, oh, I'm falling apart. And everyone else, it's just like this cycle that goes round and round and round and through the generations.
Absolutely. And one of the things, for example, if someone gives you a compliment and you bat it off, what are you saying to other people? You know, if you can't own your strengths, then you're training the women around you who are more junior that they shouldn't own their strengths either. So I sometimes find it a really great way of motivating people to say, okay, if you can't do this for yourself, if it feels uncomfortable to do it for yourself, do it for the people who are watching you.
Yeah. And sometimes that works better than doing it for themselves because, again, if you want to be one of those leaders, if you want to be an inspiring leader, an engaging leader, one who coaches and develops your team, that want to do that can be more motivating than trying to just do it for yourself.
Absolutely. I find that with my personal goals, if I try it, like I would like to eat more healthily in order to live a long, healthy life and be around and run around with my son, who's only 4. If I do it for myself, I quickly reach for the mini Colin the caterpillars, which are my weakness. But if I do it for him, that just helps me to embed the new behavior that I want to.
Yeah, it's like who else is in this with you, and what is it for, and how do you make that work? And there is nobody in the world who can resist a mini Colin the Caterpillar. You just have to not have them in the house.
I know. At the moment, I live a 10-minute walk from Marks and Spencer's.
Oh,
I'm moving soon to Cumbria. There is no Marks and Spencer. There's no shop within walking distance, and that is a very, very good thing.
I have to say, if I lived 10-minute walk from Marks and Spencer's, there would be a lot of Colin the Caterpillars in my world. So I totally understand that. So let's move on because I wanted to ask you some quick fire questions, if that's okay with you. I think
Yeah.
what's been really interesting is I love you know you talked about your kind of style as being really open, being really honest, being really you, and it's so refreshing to hear people saying, yeah, I got fired, I didn't do very good in my first management job, I had to fire someone that I'd hired because I didn't do them a good service in terms of how I was leading them. It's great to hear these things, and none of those things make you less successful. They are the route to your success. They are the things that have led you to where you are. So thank you very much for sharing in such an open way. It's been really, really great. So quick fire, are you ready for it?
I am.
Right, question number 1. We're going to go deep into WorkJoy now. What is always guaranteed for you personally to bring you a little bit of work joy?
It is that moment when you see somebody that you're coaching or a women in my program, when I see them recognize their own awesomeness. You can see
Mm,
it in their face. You can see it dawn that actually there's nothing wrong with them and they're actually really, really good at what they do and they deserve to be doing what they do. That moment is the most precious thing about coaching, I think.
yeah, like you want to capture it and pop it in a little bottle and keep it forever.
Yeah.
Love it. And it's interesting, isn't it, that it can take quite a while for that to happen. And when people do, and when they realize that being awesome isn't the same as being perfect. And I
Mm,
think there's a lot of confusion there. It's like I have to be perfect to be awesome. It's like, no, you're awesome even because of your imperfections. They are what make you awesome.
yeah.
So it's so lovely. Yeah, I get that one too. As a coach, I definitely feel it. Number 2, you gave us a little bit of a preview on this one, but this question is, what book are you currently reading?
So I'm reading The Authority Gap by Mary Ann Seagart. And it's all about how women are taken less seriously than men and what we can do about it. I'm still only halfway through, and she's just a wonderful storyteller. She's a very senior, very experienced journalist and editor, and she tells these incredible stories alongside all the facts that really help you realize just how many invisible barriers are there for women. And even more so, obviously, for women of color or women with disabilities, for example. But it's just really, really eye-opening, because I think as an ambitious woman, I always thought for years, well, there's nothing standing in my way. It's all up to me. And now it's realizing, actually, if I've achieved this, despite all those barriers, I must be really good. And that's what I love for all the senior women out there, is going, oh, actually, if I'm as good as the men here, even though I have overcome all these barriers, I must be really, really good.
Must be. I haven't read it. I have seen it. I have a massive pile of books that are still to be read, but I'm going to add that one onto it. It sounds like a really great book. Like one of the ones that I was thinking of when you were saying that, around another one that's really good for kind of understanding the position. And I'm now going to totally forget what it's called. I'll come back to it. I totally can't remember it, but a really good one about like the stats about how the world is created for men, and how everything from, you know, PPE to crash test dummies and all of those things have been created based on like the male norm, and how it doesn't fit for women. So even go like further back, not just in the workplace, but for everything. So
Invisible Women,
really,
I think it's called.
Invisible
I can't
Women.
remember the
That's what it's,
author,
yes.
but yeah.
Caroline, I think it's something like Criado Perez or something like that. Invisible Women, yeah. And how, so that sounds like another great one to add to my little reading list there. Thank you for that. Right. What is the best or most useful bit of advice that you have had, that someone has given you in your life, that you always find yourself coming back to?
I think it's linked to that perfection point. So when I had my first director role, and I was lucky enough to have a coach then, and my coach said to me, what if you didn't have to be perfect? And I actually started hyperventilating.
I don't understand a world like this.
Exactly, because it was like, well, how do you go through life not trying to be, why would you not try to do your absolute best at absolutely everything? And at the time I was watching Desperate Housewives, and it was like season 1, and Brie was this Stepford wife. And I realized actually she is perfect in theory and so unlikable. And for me, that really brought out the idea that actually my strive for perfection might be holding me back rather than propelling me forward. And I started at that point to move from operating from a place of fear to operating from a more calm, grounded place where actually I have value regardless of how I'm doing in the workplace.
Yeah, I love that. What if you didn't have to be perfect? It's a really good one. I think lots of people on the listening now would be going, yeah, what if?
Or
We'll take that one
hyperventilating.
forward. Or hyperventilating, or going, I don't understand the dynamics of not being perfect. This is what I've done my whole life. Right. With that, I'm going to move on to the next question. What is one super practical bit of advice to our listeners that is something that they could go and do now, tomorrow, the next day, that you think might help them get a little bit more joy in their lives?
I think it is probably using that cloak of authority. So realizing that you don't have to have natural authority, like to have those conversations. Just imagine you're putting on your cloak of authority, and it will just help you feel more prepared and less scared. It will give you the courage to have those challenging conversations.
Great. So pop it on, step into it, and allow that courage to just kind of come through that visualization versus actually having to feel it.
Yeah.
Great. It's always interesting, isn't it, as well, around the kind of topic of courage, is I think we often think we need it before we get into a conversation. But I actually think the courage comes from doing from the action, from making it happen. So anything that helps you step into and actually do what you need to do will help you build the courage you need to do it. It's like almost that you have to propel yourself forward in some way to make it happen.
100%, yeah.
Right. Final question, because I think lots of people are going to want to go and find out more about you. Where can people find out more about you and your work and all kinds of things Carla related?
Thanks, Beth. Well, first place to go is my website, which is carlamillertraining.com. And you can find out about my Influence and Impact program there, or my Be Bolder 4-week course, which is for any woman. And that's about becoming more confident and assertive. I have a podcast as well. In fact, Beth is going to be featuring on it. In fact, by the time this comes out, Beth will already have been featured on it.
Yeah, there we go.
That's called Influence and Impact for Female Leaders. And on that, we talk about topics like this, and also topics that just aren't talked about enough in the workplace. We talk about things like menopause and fertility and all those conversations where it's just nice to bring them out into the open. So the podcast, which I'm lucky enough that it usually sits in the top 20 of the Apple management charts, which astounds me all the time, but obviously it's helping people. And then very excitingly, as this episode comes out, my book comes out. So it's called Closing the Influence Gap. And it's a practical guide for women leaders who want to be heard. And it talks you through exactly this. It talks you through how to see yourself as a leader, how to be seen by others as a leader, how to increase your impact and influence. And then finally, there's a section on developing your career and a section on troubleshooting. So all the questions that people ask me that they probably wouldn't ask their line manager, like, how do I get over that bullying ex-boss that I had? They're all in there with my answers. So I'm hoping that's going to be a really practical resource that will sit on a lot of desks.
Yeah, great. I love the fact that it's practical as well, because as you say before, there's a lot of theory of these things out there. Actually, from people who've been there and done it and talked about it and worked with so many different people, I am very much looking forward to getting my copy and having a good old read of it as well. So we will make sure we send people in the direction of the book, and we'll put all the links in to the show notes so that people can link straight through to your website. So Carla, a huge thank you for being on the WorkJoy Jam. It's been really great talking to you. Thank you for being so open and honest and just being wonderfully yourself. And I think I'm definitely going to take away the "what if you didn't have to be perfect" question and see where that leads me to.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy, a work joy.
There we go. A great work joy for you. Thanks, Carla.
Bye.
Thank you again to Carla for coming on the WorkJoy Jam podcast. It's so lovely to hear from people who talk about the highs as well as the lows, the things that go wrong, getting fired, having to fire people, knowing that you need to do something different in your leadership, and then using all of that amazing learning that you have to help other people, to influence people better, to be able to be self-aware, to understand that other people have these challenges and things that go on in their heads too. And I think that great bit of advice that Carla was given about what if you didn't need to be perfect, what if it didn't have to be perfect, I think is a really good one that we could all keep in mind, because it's not actually the perfection that makes us awesome. It's all the stuff that maybe isn't quite so perfect. We are awesome without perfection. So thank you very much, Carla, for being on the WorkJoy Jam, and really hope that everything with the book goes really, really well. We'll put the links into the show notes so you can have a look at Carla's book. So thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Do remember there's 5 seasons of different conversations with people from different backgrounds, different experiences, loads of different advice out there on whichever is your favourite podcast app. You can get the WorkJoy Jam. And we also have Club WorkJoy, our community, which is all working together to have that awesomeness of learning from each other. Club WorkJoy, do have a look on our website and make sure you follow us on socials. Have a great rest of your day.